have Hanlon 1, which means you now have, for the first time in American history, 2 Native American women going to go sit in the U.S. Congress. One from Kansas and New Mexico.
Along with 2 Muslim women, too.
And one with 2 new, right, exactly. Yeah, right. They won their elections as well. We may be hearing from Ilhan later with any luck. So let me come back to where we kind of left off with, and what Danny just said. I mean, I think that we're looking at the Democrats now who've taken the House. Let's talk for a moment about what Paul just said and everybody else has just said. What does that really mean in terms of the body politic and where this is going to go? I mean, if the Democrats are only going to use their seizing the House to question Trump and sort of investigations around Trump, but not to posit any new ideas, that if you have this huge split in America that is built around race and social ideas, and we cannot put that as a kind of a minor issue. It's one of the major issues that we face in this country that always kills every movement that exists. Where do you think this takes us? Where does it take the House? What do they do?
I mean, I think it's an open question. I mean, I think, and again, I said this earlier, I think something that people may be surprised about, I suspect that you will see Nancy Pelosi and the House leadership immediately try to work with Trump, because the reality is I think the Democrats have already shown they're not going to be completely obstructionist.
So what will that do? Let's say
well, I think it will help Trump win the election in 2020. I mean, I think that the reality is Trump sort of ran as someone who, I mean, he honestly sort of ran as like a center-right independent, right? But in a 2-party system, you can't really govern without a party. He was all in on Republicans. He really used the judges to press his partisan advantage with Republicans. But some of his biggest issues aren't Republican issues. But he started to roll them back out. One in this midterm, and I think also looking forward to 2020, prescription drug prices, infrastructure, his biggest campaign promise that he hasn't done anything on yet, trade, where he's already doing some other things. I mean, these are things that are traditionally sort of core things in the Democratic caucus, and I believe very strongly that the leadership there is going to seek to grab it. Now, what that does more broadly, I don't really know. I mean, there will be a subset of Democrats who will be vehemently against that, because they will say that we have to do everything to obstruct Trump, but who will those people be? I think they will tend to be more affluent suburban districts. I think the people who could use the jobs, who would like to have lower, pay on their Medicare Advantage and different things like that, will like to see these things from Democrats. So in a weird way, I actually think that, and I said this before the election, this could actually be the best possible outcome for Trump, which will allow him to burnish his reputation as an independent who can work on both sides, who's fighting for the working man on all these different issues, and he still has the Senate so he can still push the judge issue.
And what he's going to do, Paul, let me just throw this to attitude, you can come into this, and then everybody, I want to jump into this. What Trump has said is that he wants infrastructure that is built and controlled by private companies, not federal money. So that, and we'll see if the Democrats can bridge that divide, but he's very clear about that. So, I mean, you were going to say what to that? Paul J.
It's complicated.
Yes, it is.
There are some deep splits and fractures in the elites. There is a section of the state. There's a reason why Mueller's been going after Trump. There's a whole section of the elite state apparatus that wants this guy out. There's a section of the traditional neocons that wants this guy out. They can't, as much as they've had to embrace him in the Republican Party, the rest of the elites are really, they love the tax breaks, but they don't trust this guy to lead them into crises. I want to just step back a bit to something Jackie said earlier. The problem for us is there is a real fascization going on here because we are heading into a very dangerous period of human history. And the elites know it, even though they don't want to talk about it. They know climate change is coming. The deniers are BS. They don't really even deny it themselves. It's a political gambit for them. It's a partisan issue to play, but they know crisis is coming. One of the things that barely gets talked about, except at the elite level, is the coming of artificial intelligence and roboticization is going to get rid of millions of jobs in the next 10, 15 years. Millions. At the recent Bilderberg conference, and no, I don't think Bilderberg runs the world, but they are a section of real elite conversation.
And for your viewers, who's Bilderberg?
The people that run the world who come and talk to each other. I just don't think they run the world from the Bilderberg conference. But on the last, it's secret meetings, but the agenda is public. I think point 4 was the future of work, and point 5 or 6 was artificial intelligence. They know this massive unemployment is coming. not being talked about. Big crisis coming. They know that with this financial deregulation and this crazy speculation and the amount of money that's flowed up to this top less than 1 percentile, that all the things that led to the crash of 07, 08, it's coming again. I don't know if it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. There's a lot of things converging for a very profound crisis. In that profound crisis, who's going to manage the system for them? And I don't, in general, I don't think the elites want an all-out fascist solution, but it's certainly there because these aren't such controllable situations. They've used the destruction of public school system where nobody knows a damn thing about history. They've used the media in a way to sow, Gore Vidal had this line called USA, United States of Amnesia. The people have such an ahistorical view to what's going on. These are all the conditions for fascism. And of course, the role of Clinton and Obama and the corporate Democrats, because inequality got so much worse under them. But we're in this position of having to balance. I personally think the corporate Dems and the Democratic Party in power is better than the overt fascism. What I don't agree with is when you say let's vote for the lesser evil or support the lesser evil, let's never not call them evil. Not that it's good and I don't believe in good and evil, but you know what I mean. Like, we should never create illusions about what the corporate Democrats are. We need to tell working people the whole truth and talk and fight for as progressive a values as possible. But I don't think we can get into the position of saying, it doesn't make any difference whether the Dems take Congress or not. There has to be a fight now to force the Dems in Congress to do something whatever progressive people, relatively progressive and progressive members of the House are. There has to be a fight here because on this point of collaboration with the Republicans, that is because they still think they can win elections by winning over the center and the center right, instead of mobilizing the millions of people who don't vote and registering and a real overt progressive agenda. So there'll be a fight on that, but I don't think they're going to just go along with Trump because they know that we'll reelect him. And in the final analysis, the Dems really only care about their own power. And they want the White House back.
So I have a question, Mother, but let me just turn to both Lester and Jacqueline here to kind of comment on what you just said and where we are before we hit another subject. Lester, let me start with you and go over to Jacqueline. Mike. Do you have thoughts on where we just left?
Yeah, but so there's a challenge if we talk about politics at such a high scale, right? Where we end up running the risk of demobilizing constituencies, but then B, not really thinking through and taking some type of, I don't want to say credit, but taking some type of, here's another way to think about it. I was here 2 years ago, literally here.
Yeah.
And drinking like cider and shots of Fireball whiskey while we were, I'm sorry, man. I thought you knew about that.
No, I did. It was getting obvious as the evening.
It wasn't hard to tell. It was not hard to tell.
As the evening unfolded, it was rather clear.
This is just water.
This is just water. The cider and Fireball is in the back. I remember how we felt when we left. Right? Even as nobody in that room was a Democrat. Nobody in that room was. But I remember how we felt as we left, as if the world were ending. If somebody would have told us in that moment, as we were looking at the headlines, and then as we left, like, listen, in 2 years, the Democratic Party is actually going to take the House back, and we're going to have 2 Democratic socialists elected to the House. One actually representing my parents in Detroit. nobody would, I don't think, and that we would have given felons the right to vote again in Florida.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
At the same time, and in fact, that only happens if a sizable number of white Republicans vote for that. Who would have believed that?
True.
So yes, we got 22 years left before climate change actually hits, and it's probably going to happen sooner than that, right? And yes, financial capital and other sectors of capital have a stranglehold, it seems, on the political system. But it has to be a way to talk about that at the same time as we're acknowledging people power. Right, because that's what really happened. We had someone who aspires to be a fascist, take the state, and he lost. Right, so how do we talk about them both at the same time? Those are my thoughts.
Right. Yeah, and I mean I agree with that, and I hear the arguments about the arguments for harm mitigation. Right, that we need to focus on as far as voting for the Democratic Party, and that's fine, because of course if you're in a war and you get wounded and your leg gets blown off, well, you would like to stop bleeding so you don't die. So of course you want harm mitigation to happen. But while somebody stops the bleeding, at some point you need to be healed, right? So while we're talking about needing the harm mitigation that we get with the Democrats taking the House, that's harm mitigation. That's important, and we need to celebrate that. We absolutely need to celebrate the grassroots, local, people-powered efforts that did give us 2 Democratic socialists. I didn't even realize that there was another one, and the reenfranchisement of felony voters, which is incredibly important, especially for the Black and Latino population. But at the same time, we have to also focus on coming down from that high level, that 10,000-foot level, to not just focusing in on what happened, like in Georgia. Like, how do you get that kind of people power that was behind that mobilization, that amazing mobilization behind this unlikely candidate in Stacey Abrams, who was up against this man who, honestly, Brian Kemp just really did too much damage for too long to have, and I think this is that what happened in Georgia is an example of the Democratic Party not focusing on the issues that really did negatively affect people, honestly, until it was too late. Because Kemp has been allowed to run roughshod on voter suppression in Georgia for too long.
Which could have played a role in this election.
It absolutely played a role in this election.
We just don't know what type of role.
Yeah, I mean, so while we can celebrate that, yeah, we've done some harm mitigation and on the ground we've done some great things, we also have to focus on, so now what are these people who we've elected to mitigate this harm, what are they going to do to put some legs behind the people who are on the ground doing the work on November 7th, on November 8th, on December 15th? What kind of support are these people going to push for these people in these communities on the ground who still need help, who are still on the battleground, they're still bleeding, their limbs are, I'm sorry for the war, but honestly, I look at this as a war, and especially as a 51-year-old Black woman who is kind of afraid for the kind of society our grandkids are going to have to grow up in, that they're going to have to grow up and fight the same battles that my mother fought, that my grandmother fought. Partially because we live in a very racist society and we won't admit that and we won't deal with it. But also partially because we have one political party that is just really, really weak and spineless on the issues, and they just won't back us up.
So I want to introduce a new guest here on the way to that, because I think that I really want to get to this point that you just finished raising about what we are facing in America now, where do we go with all of this, and what this election tells us or doesn't tell us. Before